Hi there, back again. Amo Raju with his podcast, The Ambassador Talks, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Sangita Dosanjh. And I want to talk about Dosanjh in a bit because you've got quite an interesting story about that surname.
Please do.
But welcome today, and I'm really extra pleased because you're a fellow author. You're a fellow author from my own hometown. So that's really good to actually talk to somebody who's been through that struggle and emotion of writing a book. So Sangita, tell us about yourself. Tell us about why we're talking today. And I mean, I know, but let's have the viewers get to know more about you and your story.
Yeah, so my story, I was born in 1963 in Derby. So I've stayed in Derby. So that in itself is kind of special.
Yeah.
And so I then, just to give you a little bit of background. So I was born in Normanton, like many of the children of immigrants. And then we moved out into Ulverston when I was about 8 years old. And I went off to Norbaker School, went to Wilmorton College, all Derby-based places. And I did leave Derby for a while, went to Wolverhampton Polytechnic, studied social sciences. But and then I got involved in the family business like you do.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, so my dad had bought a market stall. I hated it. But 4 years on the market. Okay. Then I trained in hypnotherapy because I became very interested in stress management.
Okay.
Then I started a rental business. That takes me to about 2000. And then come about 2012, I sort of was less involved in the rental business.
Sure.
And I was living with my dad. My mum had passed away. You know, life changes. And we started, I literally just sat down with Dad. And I don't know, to be honest, when I think about it, I don't really know how this started, this book writing, because I don't like to put myself down, but academically, I'm not really going to be writing.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing in my background that would say I would be writing a book.
Everyone's got an author in them. That's what I say.
I do hear that a lot, but I believe that now.
Yeah.
Because I did actually get to publish this book. So I just sat down with Dad, and so I said to him, so the very first story he told me was actually the cover of my book. Right. So, you know, I was just like really sort of taken aback by the fact that he'd, arrived in England, hadn't quite got £5 because you weren't allowed to bring any more than £5. And we're going back to 1954. Yeah. So he's now 90 years old and he's been here 70 years as of last year. And so I thought I was just writing about him, and I was writing about him, but I realised I was writing about a whole community. So I've already skipped ahead because when I wrote one story, it wasn't a story that he'd told me before. What I found is that because Dad was always at work, like a lot of the dads, particularly of immigrants, because they're always trying to work as much as they possibly could, he was never there. So it's not like I sat down, you know, and he'd been telling me his life story. I know some people do, they have, you know, they know some of the stories. They seem to know a lot about the parents because the parents were talking, but Dad wasn't. So I wasn't too sure if another story was going to come. So it was story after story, and it was linking to a comment he'd make, and I was really astounded by his memory for one, because I don't have that memory. So, you know, I was just making notes, and then I started putting some of these, and I thought, oh, it's really interesting. And I started to actually think, I wonder if I could write it in such a way that it sounds really interesting. So he's talking to me in Punjabi, and that's his first language, and I'm writing in my first language, English. And it was very important for me to then read those stories back and for him to actually express the same emotion that he expressed it with. So, and when, you know, sometimes there were tears, sometimes it's laughter. And that's why it took me a long time. It took me 9 years to get the whole book together.
And that's really important. You know, you're writing, you know, somebody else's, even though it's your dad, it's still somebody else's story.
Yes.
And their emotion and their experiences, to capture that's quite a challenge. I want to come to the cover of your book here, which we've got on display here. It's a great painting you've brought in today. I mean, that picture says 10,000 words to me. There's a lot going on in there, and I recognise the city of Derby there,
Yes.
and the cathedral there and everything. But tell us about this, and tell us about the name of the book, and your dad's name and everything.
Yeah. So my dad's name is Ajit Singh Dosanjh, and so he's from Dosanjh Kala in Punjab.
Yeah.
So in India. So there, if you look at that photograph, so he's carrying a suitcase, which we would now consider to be, an overnight bag.
Yeah.
But that's got all his belongings in that he's come to, and it's not full. He only had 2 or 3 items in there. And that suitcase in itself is 60 years old. I got that from...
You still got it?
Yeah, it's not his suitcase.
Okay, yeah.
So I got it from an uncle of mine, Joel. And I've forgotten his first name. He's going to... oh my goodness, I can't remember his name. And the bedding is from an auntie, Mindo auntie.
Yeah.
So I just, it was actually my idea for this book cover, not the positioning of it, because I was very fortunate that I came across a filmmaker who was a student at Derby University through Phil Bassey, who's also a Derby man.
Yes.
And so Ayush Power, I like to give him credit for that photograph because he hadn't been in Derby for very long. Okay. And he said, I know where you can stage this photograph. So that was actually, we stopped the traffic and that photograph was taken. So my partner, he actually put on the coat. That coat belongs to my brother-in-law's father,
right?
Mr. Badwell. And so we had the coat. The turban belongs to my cousins. So like my Buaji's, my Pupaji's turban, that is. So he's no longer here. So that was left with his son, my cousin. So so there's all these. There's
a lot of little stories in there in that one picture, and I think what for me it's powerful because it captures a lot. And you said the suitcase was half empty, and I know my granddad came with a half empty suitcase and a turban as well.
Yeah.
And borrowed clothes.
Borrowed, yeah.
Because they had to, the story with my granddad, he realised he had to come to England because he's got his visa, but he had no Western clothes to wear. And he goes, how am I going to say? I had to borrow a jacket.
Yeah.
Of somebody.
Yeah. And I always find that really interesting because, they came wanting to fit in.
Yeah.
So they're not coming in, because their clothes normally you'd be wearing sandals.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to wear, a heavy boot or a heavy shoe.
Yeah.
So I really admire that they wanted to look as if they'd come to a different country and they came with a mission in mind. So, it is quite an emotional photograph, really.
So one of the things, when we met last time, we had a coffee a few months ago, didn't we? And you told me this real interesting story about the origin of your surname. And
yes.
I loved that story. Let's share that with the viewers now.
Yeah.
So Dosanjh, where's the surname Dosanjh come from?
Yeah. So so is it a story about how they'd moved? Yeah. So they were living in a place called Poidra.
Right.
All the Dosanjhs were.
Yeah.
And so due to invasion, so we're going back to about 1840.
Yeah.
So it was quite normal for people to move in little groups. So about 50 men and women, they left Dosanjh, the Poidra.
Yep.
But their name is Dosanjh. And so they would set up in a field somewhere, with their tools. They would be farming the land. There was always food that they could grow. Then be moved on. And say, well, you can't farm this bit because you're in the, you're that's our patch. So eventually they moved to near Badapind. And so again, they settled and they were farming and stuff. And on this one occasion, there was a marriage party coming back from Ferala, which is another little village. And so the Dosanjh clan were they were kind of heard all this commotion, and it was a wedding party. So they were quite well known, people. And so they were actually met by these kind of bandits, They were thinking, well, marriage party, gold, we're going to ambush these people. And they intervened, the Dosanjh people did. And as a thanks, they said, well, why don't you settle here? You've helped us. This was quite amazing bravery you showed.
Yeah.
So that's why the Dosanjh Kala is actually where it is located now. So Badapind, anybody from Badapind and Dosanjh, you must always shake hands and give each other a hug.
Well, because that's just because so many people, I mean, it's a well-known surname. It's a very common surname in the Punjabi community. So, and I know so many people originate from that village. So, now they know the origins of it.
Yes, and also, of course, we know the biggest superstar on the planet at the moment.
Diljit
has been, I hope he's going to sit here and plug me as well. I mean, I don't even have to say who it is, do I really?
Well,
because everybody knows who we're
very
talking
well
about.
where he's from. So,
yeah.
But no, it's such a powerful story. And it's, again, somebody from a village in the Punjab that probably at that time wasn't very well known, but obviously is now for many reasons, makes this trip, 5,000 miles away with a few pounds in his pocket to a complete foreign land, doesn't understand the language, doesn't understand the culture, but he's hungry. He wants to work.
Yes.
He wants to provide a better life for his family.
Yes.
So again, that's such a kind of a powerful story in itself as to why you and I couldn't do that.
No.
And he was young and healthy, obviously, so he had all his life ahead of him to do that. Tell us about some of the challenges that you think that you've listed in the book, obviously, as to what.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that this is a story of not just hundreds but thousands of people. Yeah. So this is what I realized when I was writing it, that I wasn't just telling his story. It was the same story, and especially of probably Punjabis, or anybody really leaving India. Wherever you were leaving from, you had the same challenges. And globally, the Punjabis have gone everywhere. So a lot of them came over to England and then went on to Canada and America. Yeah. So, so everybody knows, everybody identifies with story. It doesn't matter where you're reading it, because I've had quite a few people talk to me now and say, oh, we did that. So the kind of challenges were everyday challenges. I mean, let's start with, they get here and they, used to eating a nice fulka that comes off the, tava. That's we all appreciate that. There's nothing like a fresh roti.
Fresh roti, yeah.
So I remember Dad telling me that, they saw flour in the shops and they went and bought some plain flour, put some water to it, and it turned to glue. And thought, oh, this isn't right. Luckily, the early, because he is amongst the early arrivals.
I think if I'm right, he's probably one of the first to come to Derby.
Yes.
In 1954. I went through some records a couple of years ago, and I got to about 55, 56. But if you had came in 54, you're probably one of the earliest.
Yes. I mean, there are a few earlier ones.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a relative that he actually came over with, who is still with us.
Okay.
He's 96 now. Yeah. Nirmal Singh Atwal.
Oh yeah,
I know him. So the challenge was they were everywhere. Everything they did, but I still think they sort of tried to move quietly, fit in, go to work, keep their heads down. Yeah. The worst thing that could happen to them is that they didn't get overtime. Yeah. And they didn't. A lot of the people, they didn't really pace themselves. It became, they didn't really know how not to overwork. Yeah. There was no such thing as stress. You worked as hard as you possibly could. And, when they were, some people made themselves very ill. Yeah. And I think we don't know about, many of the problems that, because, we are a community that tend, and maybe, this used to go on in the old days where they just got on with it.
And you're right. I mean, I did a documentary a couple of years ago, and one thing that came up very strongly from those early pioneers, I'd call them, that came to a foreign land. We'll use Derby as an example, but the same story could be said in Slough, Wolverhampton, and Birmingham, Manchester, wherever. It's the same kind of scenario where, as you said, they were desperate for that overtime. Overtime was a big thing for them. But then the work's flat out so much that they actually forgot who they were. Sometimes forgot their own personality was lost somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Because all they knew, they'd go to work, then they'd come home and sleep. And if I'm right in saying, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, did you guys used to have a shop on Princess Street?
We did, yeah.
You see, now I remember in those days, my family came and settled on Harrington Street. And as a child in the early 70s, I can remember walking down to your dad's shop and getting the basic goods. And it was, my mum said, after I met your dad a few months ago, and I went home and told my mum who I'd met, she goes, "Oh yeah, we used to go to a shop because he was the only one who could sell the ingredients that we needed to make a curry." It's incredible. One of the things in that documentary that came across strongly was the concept of baichara, where they actually got on with each other so well and they wanted to help each other.
Amazing.
There was this thing in that I can't see it today. People don't want to help each other today, but those early settlers, they looked out for each other. Didn't care what background they were from. They just wanted to make sure, are you okay? Are you okay? Are your kids back home hungry? Do they need to be sent some money? There was a lot of that going on. And I cannot see that today.
No.
And so I think that's an important thing, because what they brought also with them when they came over was this kind of brotherhood, sisterhood, in terms of we are all one family.
Yeah.
And we all got the same mission to do better.
Yes, because I think they realised how difficult it was. You know, say if many of the people weren't, they hadn't been to school, they were illiterate. So to come into another country, it was unspoken.
Yeah.
You help somebody. You didn't have to say, "Oh, go to blah 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 office and fill out the form." They knew. Yeah. You aren't going to be able to do that. No. I'm going to come with you. And so they'd spend a lot of time helping each other, to the point where I don't think they functioned as individuals. They functioned as a community. Yeah. And they sort of almost policed each other as well. Because there were new challenges coming into a new community. There was going to be this, and there were problems. Mixed marriages were going on, mixed relationships, and everybody was mixing, which was probably a good, overall, it was a good thing. And the caste system,
that's still relevant today.
That got thrown to one side. You could be working alongside a doctor.
Oh, and that's, as I said, the baichara thing was really important. They really got on with each other, and they all kind of helped each other. Your dad was probably the same. My dad told me, before he passed away many times, that there'd be 10, 15 people living in one house, and you'd never see each other because they were all working different shifts, rotating. One would come home from work and sleeping in a bed that somebody just got out of.
Yes.
And it was just, you were so tired that you didn't care. You just took your clothes off, fell asleep.
Yes.
Got dressed in the morning, went to work, and you just got your head down.
Yeah, it was really robotic, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
In a way, not like you say. They weren't really thinking too much. Send money home, and they were all doing it. Yeah. Send money home. It seemed to be like absolutely essential that you sent as much as you possibly could. Then they built these kotiyan, there was a dream. Yeah. And I was thinking, one of this, I was looking at my dad's sort of life, and it was very typical of people, within 10 years, where for generations, my dad he got his first bicycle when he was, about 16. And that, that was life-changing for him. You come over to England, you've got your house within a couple of years. Yeah. You've got a car, you've got a van, and you've got a shop. Yeah. And within 10 years, you've got what you would have, your ancestors had never seen before. They were like dreaming of getting a radio. Yeah. And then now all these, you had all these materialistic items.
But that's one of the reasons they came over, because they wanted this concept of owning property was a really important thing. And they came here, and they didn't like the idea of paying rent. Yes. Why should we pay rent when we can own our own house?
Yes.
And today you and I take it for granted that we work and we get a mortgage, and to them, my dad said they weren't handing out mortgages readily to people who just come, because they had no history. No. In fact, my dad said he went to buy a house, and the chap who was selling it liked my dad so much, and the banks refused him to give a mortgage because he just couldn't provide the details that he wanted. So the guy who was selling it said, "There's a private loan between you and me. Just buy it off me, pay me monthly."
Wow.
Again, it wouldn't
Yeah.
happen today
No.
because people just had this. There was a strong sense of community
Yes.
and this desire to help each other. And I thought that was such a powerful thing from somebody who's from a very well settled community in Derby to say to a complete stranger, a foreigner, "Here, I'll lend you some money."
Yes. Yeah.
So again, that story was really important. Now tell me about the book. How's it doing? It's been out for a couple of months, and I've seen you on social media doing the rounds and getting everywhere, which is really impressive. So tell me how it's doing and what's the reception like from the readers.
So my first book launch was at the Indian Community Centre.
Yes.
Which was very important to me, because the Indian Community Centre is quite, it's the Indian Community Centre, quite basic.
Yeah.
We all sort of went there at one time. We used to go to weddings, and then we've kind of become a bit posh now, haven't we? We wouldn't dream of having our functions there, but we mustn't forget our roots,
Absolutely.
because it was the hub.
Yeah.
That's where we all went. That's where we socialised, and our parents, they would be quite happy sort of going there still. So I did my first launch there. Then I did sort of launch at the library, Kedleston Hall.
Yeah.
But to me, that it was very special to have gone to the Indian Community Centre, and Balbir Sandhu was very helpful.
Absolutely.
And I think he got it, straight away the minute I mentioned it. So he goes, "Yeah, do what you want here."
He's a great bloke.
Yeah, and then the idea was always to kind of go on Amazon.
Yeah.
I had this dream, not in the early days, but later on, just put it on Amazon. Get it out there globally. The Punjabis in particular, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
It'd be great if everybody bought a book. Not even buying the book, just you're in that book.
Yeah.
All of us are part of this book. And I didn't, I'm now kind of talking in hindsight because I didn't really think that deep about it when I was writing it. But it's available on Amazon. So I've got an ebook, I've got the hardback, the paperback. And what's most exciting for me is there's an audiobook coming out.
Ah, yes. Are you doing it yourself?
No. So through Amazon, they found a man in India. I've never met him.
Right.
He's going to be reading, because the book is it's like an autobiography, but it's a biography. But I comment in it as well.
Sure.
My sort of comments on it. And so they've got an English-speaking person for me.
Yeah.
And then my dad's voice is by somebody with an Indian accent.
Fantastic.
So I'm really looking forward to it because I think audiobooks, I personally don't read many books, which I'm not very proud of, but I do listen.
It's the future. A lot of people, I mean, my book's out on audio and I've noticed I'm getting more sales on audio than on the paperback. And people still do like the hard copy in their hand.
Yeah.
But the fast world around us, people on their way to work or going for a jog or something, they like to have something in their headphones.
Yes.
So that's the future, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And I'd like to see the book in Punjabi, but I think Dad will really, and a lot of the people will be able to listen and understand it better than actually reading it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for him as well.
It's fantastic. And I was going to ask you that how has Dad felt about it? The book out and his life on public display.
I think he finds it. Some of the things I talk about, like I've got this cornflake story.
All right.
Where they'd sort of come across cornflakes for the first time and they sort of thought they were like dry leaves and what was all this about, and ate them without putting the milk on them. Then I'm writing about things like that, and he thinks, who wants to read about cornflakes and what we did and what we wore. Whether we wore shoes, when did you get your first pair of shoes, when did you get your first bike? And he doesn't quite get it because to him it seems all very frivolous. They just got on with it and they just did it. And so I think as more people tell him, I've really enjoyed reading about you.
Yeah. I
think he's kind of getting it more.
Okay, that's good.
But no, and I kind of admire him for that, but it's a bit annoying because I think, Dad, I've written a book,
It's probably taking it in his stride.
Yes.
I'm going to talk to you about food because when you talked about cornflakes, that reminded me. a lot of people, when I was growing up, and you're probably going to share a similar experience. If my dad ever got in the kitchen, which my mum would be very rarely let him, if he ever got in the kitchen, he'd make a spam curry
Oh right, yeah,
and pilchard curry.
yeah, yeah,
I presume that was something similar with. And I asked him, I said, Dad, where's this come from? He goes, when we came to this country, we had to knock up food very fast.
yeah,
And it was quick out of a tin, throw a couple of tins of pilchards in the torka,
yeah, yeah,
and that's it. Bob's your uncle,
yeah,
food done for the day.
yeah.
And to this day, I will still eat a pilchard curry
Yes,
and spam curry. It's
beans,
yeah, torka
baked
beans.
beans, yeah.
So the origin of those kind of foods, which we all kind of take for granted to some extent, there's a reason behind them.
Yeah,
Because a lot of the time, they just threw ingredients in a pan and hoped for the best.
yes,
Because they didn't know how to cook back home. There was left,
Yeah.
very sexist in today, but it was left to the women in the villages
Yeah.
to cook for them. So they came here, had to fend for themselves, and it was a bit experimental. Some of the stuff that came up,
Yeah.
but I thought great dishes.
yeah. Because the food was so bland. It was salt and pepper,
Yeah,
and that was it, literally. And they must have got such a shock
yeah,
and thought, well, yeah, this looks a bit like this looks a bit like dal.
yeah.
Beans look like dal. Put some onions in, and just getting hold of the spices, and marvelous, really.
They do it annoyingly today with pasta.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The pasta with torka in it. Oh God, why do you do
Yeah.
that?
And you think some things you have to leave alone. But it seems
uh,
to be. And I always think, haldi.
yeah,
You used to sort of colour your fingers, and I remember once an uncle saying to me, he goes, "Oh, you would only know that you'd been to a wedding when that you'd eaten at a
Yeah.
wedding, that you hadn't just been drinking when you looked at your fingers and you realised that you'd actually
all
had
yellow.
some, yeah, that you had eaten something."
So, half an hour's gone so fast here.
Yeah.
Tell me more about you. What's your plans for the future with this book and any other stories in the
Yeah.
pipeline?
Well, there's so many stories out there, and I think I'd love to whip them out fast, and so I would encourage other people basically to try to, even if you're recording them, you don't have to write them down. But what this journey has made me realise that our parents, they probably they just did it. They just did this journey, but it's a very special journey because it is going down in history. We as Punjabis and Indians in general, we're all connected by this story, and it happened because India gained its independence, and because of the Second World War. That's why we were invited to come to. Our parents were invited to come to England to work. Basically, nobody came here to sit around.
Oh, no.
They just came here just to work, but to go back.
Yeah, that was the original idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they'll get enough money to build a nice house, and then they'll go back.
Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Even today, you hear people say, "Oh, there's nothing like." You go on holiday and say, "Oh, there's nothing like coming back home and getting into your own bed."
Yeah.
And and they had that same. They had that same desire. Nobody likes to leave their home. So I felt quite sad. When I wrote my book, I felt that they didn't really. Who would leave their home unless they really had to? Yes, they did leave, and they got better lives. They got material things. But I think they lost a lot as well.
They did, and huge sacrifices were made.
Huge.
They could have, when my dad passed away just over a year ago, and I had to ring India to let them know. One of the first things my Thai said when she found out was that your dad was only 17 when he came over, and he was crying. He goes, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go there. Why do I want to go there? I've got everything here I need."
Yes.
But my grandfather was calling him. He was already here.
Yeah.
And whereas that was quite a different story to many others, they were excited that they want to get here.
Yeah.
But once he was here, he goes, "I loved it." And there's something strange that I felt with that generation. They, as you said, they built gurtis, they got settled, and they became quite almost middle class to some extent. And I used to get annoyed with my parents saying, why do they keep going to India every year, leaving me? What's so special over there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I find that I go twice a year myself because the connection is there, and the more I went there and the more I wanted to know about the history
Yes.
of my village, the history of the Rajus, and many people that go as well. They always say, "Well, I feel a connection now with my parents who are no longer here," and there's something over there that keeps pulling me.
Yeah.
I think what you've done with your book is incredible. It's
Thank you.
it's making that connection
Mm.
with a somebody who left everything to come here and get a better life for him and his offspring.
Yes.
And I hope people watching this will feel inspired to do what you've done, to capture the story of their elders.
Yes.
And even if they're not going to write a book, just what you did in terms of sitting with him and just saying, "Tell me what happened."
Yes.
I think that's strong enough itself, because sometimes stories can be passed on just by mouth through generations, even if it's not in a book. So if people don't think, "Well, okay, I don't want to be an author, I just want to hear it," I think that's strong enough as well,
Yeah.
just to keep talking to that elder generation. So hats off to you for doing
Thank you.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming today, Sangita. It's been an enjoyable chat. I wish we had more time, and I will call you back again
Yeah,
at
yeah.
some stage. But any final message before we shut the cameras?
Just that really. Just embrace who you are. Speak to each other.
Yeah.
You know, I sometimes I get this kind of, I feel like speaking to every Indian person
Yeah.
and just saying, I might not know you, I don't know what you've been doing with your
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
but we have this thing in common.
Yeah.
So just say, just give a nod,
Yeah.
hello. We don't have to know each other in any great depth.
Yeah. That's
my
that's
message.
incredible. That's powerful. So thanks again. So thanks again for watching today. We'll see you next time. And the ambassador's been talking.